Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our CattleTrace Conversations. My name is Kyler Langbart. I serve as Program Manager for U.S. CattleTrace, the producer-led organization focused on animal disease traceability in the United States. As always, our CattleTrace Conversations are options for us to speak with industry and technology leaders, individual producers, veterinarians, and all of the above to have conversations as it relates to animal disease traceability and how that can be implemented on your operations. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by a good friend of mine and a good friend of the Midwest when it relates to cattle producers. You might have seen him or heard him before on Doc Talk on RFID and RFD TV and related media. He's a great asset to the cattle industry. Dr. Dan Thomson is joining us today. Dr. Dan, would you mind describing your background as it relates to cattle production and veterinary production?
Well, Kyler, I just want to say thanks for having me. You are a good friend, and CattleTrace is lucky to have you, and this is a great program. And so to be on here, kind of my background is I'm a third generation veterinarian. I have practiced mainly in feedlot veterinary medicine, all the way from days in practice in Greeley, Colorado, to being the consulting veterinarian for cactus feeders, and then taught at Kansas State University while joining up and being an owner in Production Animal Consultation, which is a feedlot group based out of Kansas and Nebraska. We cover about 30% of the fed cattle in the U.S. And really excited about the future and being able to serve our cattle producers.
That's great. Thanks, Dan. You keep it pretty humble, but I appreciate you sharing some of your background. I have loads more accomplishments we could talk about, but today I think we're excited to have you on because I think one of the key components to this whole, when we talk about disease traceability and essentially as well biosecurity, the first thing we always talk about is, as much as we want to be the content experts at US CattleTrace, most cattle producers, they're going to go straight to their veterinarian and have these conversations with them first and foremost. So we're excited to hear kind of your perspective today as a veterinarian today practicing in the beef cattle industry. And so, Dan, I was curious, as we talk about ADT and biosecurity today, what do you see the industry moving towards on a practical level? You working with several feedlots as a part of your consulting firm and working with up and coming students in the industry itself. How do you see ADT, continuing to progress in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, Steve Forbes, I was on a program with him in Des Moines a couple of years ago, and he's a tough act to follow. But anyway, he said, nobody in this room can predict the future. And if you could predict the future, you wouldn't be sitting here at this listen to this. You'd be on the island that you owned because of all the money you'd make. But what I really think that's going to happen with disease traceability and traceability in the beef industry is you're going to see us move closer and closer to having an industry-wide system, more adopting, possibly mandated in the future. And the reason why we do it is this isn't just about trying to increase the demand for beef. This is about protecting our industry. This is about protecting our economy as a country. This is a national security issue as we look at this. And so as I see this, I think obviously the way that I see it expanding over the next 10 years, the beef industry is shaped kind of like a wine bottle, okay? And the neck is the packer, and then it starts to fan out with the cattle feeders until you get to this big bottle, which is the cow-calf producers. And the easiest way for us to start, and I think where we'll see it, is going just the traceability from the feedlot to the packer, and then we'll start to see it fan out into, as we have preferred markets or market access or opportunities for producers. I think you'll see it fan out from packer to feedlot and then feedlot to cow-calf producer. and I hear people say, and it's kind of like the preconditioning model, where people say, well, if I'm not going to get paid for it, I'm not going to do it. And one of the things I tell producers is I don't have a whole lot of money that I'm going to leave my kids as an inheritance. Okay. But maybe if I spend a few dollars now on my beef herd or within to implement some of these programs like CattleTrace, if I do that now, maybe if I don't leave them a whole lot of money, one of the things I might pay it forward and leave them is an industry that's intact and that is competitive, and protected from that foreign animal disease that we hope never happens, but we need to buy the insurance for.
Yeah, I think those are great thoughts, Dan. And as we continue to look for, I wish we had that ball to tell us everything that was going to happen, because man, I'd be in Vegas making some money then, not working at CattleTrace. But I really think your thoughts there about leaving the industry is a better place for the next generations is really valuable there. And in today's world, I think we see an emphasis, definitely more so, on the whole of biosecurity. And oftentimes, today we see programming specifically tailored towards biosecurity, and I think that's a great thing. How do you see, as an expert in this field, biosecurity and disease traceability playing together, and how should that look in a producer's mind as they look to implement programs like these?
Well, first of all, it provides accountability within our industry. And I hear people say, well, I don't want to trace my cattle because, I don't want the liability. Well, if you don't want the liability, then it's time for y'all to move to a different industry, because today's industry, tomorrow's industry, accountability, liability is what we do. And we're producing someone's food, right? We're not pounding out a horseshoe, which would go on a horse's foot. So there's some accountability and liability there too. But this is something that people are going to ingest and put in their body. And so understanding that is important. I think that the biggest thing when I look at biosecurity, and if I was a producer and someone said, well, why would I care about biosecurity and disease traceability? And it goes back to 2003, right? When the cow that stole Christmas, the mad cow issue in the United States and Canada. And when you look at how long it took for the United States beef industry to recover on export revenue versus how long it took our Canadian counterparts to recover, in 2003, after the BSE outbreak in Canada, they recovered within 3 years. Okay. It took us twice as long in the United States to recover our export markets back. And part of the reason, there's two reasons. One, they had traceability systems, but two, we also in the US import all the Canadian beef. And so we were okay with it. So there's two ways. But if you look at what happened while we decreased export markets, if you look at what happened in Argentina and Brazil, their beef markets, because they didn't have the export, because they didn't have the quality of the animal of what we had, we were out competing them on export markets. Well, when we had our doors shut to exports, the people that we were exporting to had to find a source of beef. So they looked to Argentina and Brazil. And if you look at what happened in 2003 for their export markets, it basically, us not having a traceability system in the United States decreased our recovery from that disease outbreak and allowed them to enter some markets that we were out competing them in. Now, what difference does that make? Well, once you have a customer leave you and find someone that they like to work with, you don't just automatically get them back, and we didn't. And so it has a long shadow to that tail of what happens. So as biosecurity and foreign animal disease and traceability, this is really about helping us quickly recover export markets, to make sure that we don't lose a lot of traction within our revenue stream for our beef producers.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. And it's, as we talk about the the way to secure that accountability, one way that we see as US Cattle Trace that being really effective is the technology we're able to use today. And so, as a practicing vet, I'm sure you've had folks have questions about the technology in general. As it relates to traceability technology, what would your recommendation be to a producer who wants to partake in this biosecurity / traceability conversation, but isn't sure where to start?
Well, I think the first thing is work with your extension agent, work with university, send US Cattle Trace an email, talk to your veterinarian. Different people have different expertise. The technology of being able to use high frequency and low frequency within the system, y'all are providing flexibility. I think that one of the things that, if you ask me, why would I do this as a producer? One is, what we talked about earlier on protecting our industry. The other one is, I have producers that use it in their feedlots so that if they would accidentally send an animal that to help make sure that they do not send an animal that is potential to have antibiotic residues, that they can flag those animals, that they can find those animals. Did they arrive at the packing plant? The other thing is synchronizing and head count and number of animals shipped versus number of animals received. It helps with some of these types of things within the industry. I think that when we start to look at genetics and we start to look at genetic improvement as an industry, it'll be tied to that RFID tag that we can start to make greater strides in understanding the genetics and the performance and the health and things to that nature. And then lastly, if we think that this is the only thing that's going to be tied to one of these tags, when we see what's in our Apple Watches and these different rings and things that people and sensors, I think the future is so bright that we'll be able to use these types of technologies to find sick cattle and that. But it really gets back to protecting the industry first, and then looking for ways to improve efficiency with decreased labor in our industries to generate a healthier, more wholesome animal.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, Dan. In our opinion, I think we've seen, we're in the infancy of some of the new technologies that we discussed. We're talking about UHF, but then on the horizon, folks are talking about facial recognition and that conversation as well. But even today, we've seen companies enter this marketplace who are, working alongside our purpose of disease traceability to provide value in that equation. They're doing it in some pretty unique ways that I think not only assists the producer itself, but assists the entire beef cattle supply, going from the veterinarian who might not have to come out for every spot visit needed because of the technology that could be tracing the health of the animals, versus the supplier down the chain who you can ensure, like you mentioned at a feedlot, that they're getting those cattle exactly where they need to be. So I think we've seen a lot of value in that. We at US Cattle Trace, want to focus solely on disease traceability, but the horizon seems really bright as it pertains to those type of scenarios. Dan, any final thoughts about ADT and biosecurity, recommendations to producers or ways that you think are important for producers to take part today?
Well, I think that we need to get behind CattleTrace, and we need to get behind ADT. And if you understand what's going on relative to other countries, everybody has a different reason for having traceability systems. It might be food safety in Europe. It might be export markets for South America. But disease traceability and foreign animal disease is really what's driving it in the US and Canada. And how we set it up, the way we have it now, where we can have some government funding that supplies some funding to a privately run traceability program to help keep anonymity, to help keep things under wraps so that producers know exactly how data is being utilized to protect the industry. I think that if we don't get behind this, if we don't make this move forward, the next step will be something that has a lot more regulation to it. And so this is our time, this is our moment, and it's vitally important for the producers to get on board.
Well, thank you, Dan. I appreciate that. And Dan mentioned there some of those reasons that U.S. CattleTrace, we were created and what we want to accomplish here in the future. If you have any further questions about what U.S. CattleTrace is and how we accomplish those missions, reach out to us at our office. Let us know what questions you have. Love to jump on a conversation with you all. But I think it's been a great conversation, Dan. Thanks so much for joining us. He's a great asset to our industry, like I mentioned earlier, and we really appreciate all the assistance that he's provided the entirety of the beef cattle industry as it relates to health and well-being of our animals and the moving forward of our industry as a whole. So we appreciate that. Thanks so much for joining us for this CattleTrace conversation. We'll be back next month with our next conversation. So thank you. And like I said, if you have any questions, reach out to us or visit our website at www.uscattletrace.org. Thanks, everyone.